Good evening, friend. You arrive at a wind-salted shore where gray-blue water combs itself into soft lines. Seabirds stitch the sky in slow loops, and a curl of porridge steam rises nearby like a sleepy little cloud. You probably won't survive this, meaning your hurry might not make it through the night, because the only danger here is how gently everything refuses to rush. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and let me know how your day has really been. Your worries, your exhaustion, or even a tiny joy that made you smile. I'm here to truly listen and offer the most sincere, heartfelt advice I can. Now, turn off the lights. Take a deep, slow breath. Let your tiredness melt away and gently close your eyes. Let's drift together into tonight's dreamlike lands. And tomorrow morning, if you still remember, send me a message and tell me what you dreamed. Your feet find the edge of land where grass gives up and rock begins. The shoreline is a calm scatter of pebbles and dark sand, and the waves arrive like polite guests, always returning, always leaving, never making a fuss about it. You walk along the water just long enough to let the sea speak in that language it has practiced for thousands of years. Hush, pull, hush. Ahead, the land rises into low slopes, and the wind carries the clean smell of rain that has already happened somewhere else. You follow a narrow track where hardy plants press close to the ground, saving their strength for living instead of showing off. The light is soft enough to forgive everything, even you. Then you see it, not a grand monument, not a proud tower, but a cluster of low stone shapes tucked into the earth as if the ground is keeping a secret. Skara Brae sits quietly near the sea, a village that mastered the art of being small. Its walls are not tall, they do not brag, they wait. You step closer and notice how the stone is the color of wet moonlight. It is fitted with patience, each slab leaning into the next, as though they've had lifetimes to practice being supportive. The entrances are low, the kind that request humility without ever demanding it. You duck instinctively, and it is strange how soothing it feels to bow, just a little, to a place that has outlasted so many loud things. A doorway opens in front of you, narrow as a held breath. You slip through, and the air changes immediately. Outside, the wind is an endless conversation. Inside, it becomes a whisper. The room is dim, not because it is sad, but because it is restful. Stone holds the temperature steady, and your shoulders loosen, like they have been waiting for permission. In the center, a hearthstone rests where warmth once lived on purpose. You can almost feel the rhythm of it, embers tucked under ash, heat rising and settling, until the whole room becomes a gentle animal curled up in the dark. Around the hearth, the space feels arranged for ordinary life, a sense of things kept close, of hands knowing where everything belongs. It is practical without being harsh, careful without being precious. And then, as if your imagination has been quietly cooking, the scent arrives. Soft grain, a hint of milk, and the faint sweetness that appears when something simple is made with attention. You picture a pot over coals, porridge thickening with slow turns of a wooden stirrer. Steam lifts in lazy spirals, carrying comfort like a message you don't have to answer. It is the kind of food that doesn't ask you who you are, it only asks whether you want to be warm. You ease back out into the open air, and the seabirds greet you again, circling and gliding, occasionally dropping a note of sound that lands and fades. They are unbothered by history. They do not perform reverence. They simply exist above it, and somehow that makes the village feel even calmer. No ceremony, just continuity. The wind brushes your face with cool fingers, and you look across the low stones toward the sea. This place is ancient, yes, but it doesn't feel distant. It feels like the world has gone quiet on purpose. You move slowly because your body starts to understand the rules here. Nothing needs to be rushed. Nothing needs to be won. Even the waves take their time. You linger at the doorway, letting the hush inside and the salt air outside meet in your lungs. Porridge steam, seabirds, stone. 3 simple things, steady as breathing. And as you stand there, half in wind and half in shelter, your thoughts begin to do something rare. They stop marching. They start drifting. Skara Brae keeps its small, patient quiet, and you let yourself be held by it, just for tonight. You remain at the low doorway just long enough for the sea's cool breath and the room's steady hush to trade places in your lungs. Then you step out again, and the village begins to teach you its favorite lesson. The safest way to last is often to keep close to the ground. Skara Brae does not stand up tall and announce itself. It tucks itself into the earth, half sheltered, half hidden, as if it has learned that wind can be negotiated but never truly convinced. Around you, dunes lie in pale folds, combed by the breeze into ripples that look soft enough to sleep on and stubborn enough to swallow anything you leave unattended. Sand is everywhere, not with drama, just with dedication. It arrives the way tiredness arrives at the end of a long day, quietly, persistently, with no regard for your schedule. You walk along a shallow lane where stone edges emerge from the ground like the rims of half-buried bowls. Low walls guide your steps. They are built from flat slabs stacked with an almost tender precision, each stone leaning into the next like neighbors who have agreed to share the burden. The village feels made for hands more than for eyes, practical, textured, meant to be repaired rather than admired from afar. As you move, you notice how the homes sit slightly below the surrounding land. The earth rises gently around them, and you begin to understand why. The sea is near, the air is damp, and warmth is a treasure that must be guarded. So the village settles into a protective mound of older life, layers of shells, ash, and compacted scraps that have slowly become a kind of insulation. It is a strange comfort living inside a blanket woven from yesterday's remains, but it is also clever. The ground holds steady warmth a little longer. The pathways between houses narrow and bend. You turn left, then right, then left again, and it dawns on you that this place would be terrible for dramatic sprinting. The lanes are too modest for heroics. They are excellent, however, for wandering, soft-footed, half awake, letting your attention drift like the tide. The corners slow you down without scolding you. Even if you tried to hurry, the village would simply offer another bend and wait for your pride to catch up. In some places, the lanes become covered passages, low and sheltered, where the wind thins and the light turns dimmer. Your footsteps quiet themselves. Seabird calls arrive muffled, as if the dunes have placed a gentle hand over the sky's mouth. Shadows gather in the corridor corners, cool and calm, and you feel the difference between open air and protected space as clearly as you feel the difference between being fine and actually resting. You begin to trace the layout the way you might memorize a small constellation. Houses cluster close enough to borrow warmth from one another, yet separate enough to keep their own peace. A main spine of passageways runs through the village, and rooms branch off it like careful thoughts branching from a slow mind. You do not need a map. Your body starts to learn the pattern. Feet remember turns. Shoulders remember where to dip. Breath remembers where the air grows still. The entrances to the homes sit low and slightly off to the side, never yawning wide. Every threshold asks you to bend. Again and again your spine makes the same small bow, and it becomes less an inconvenience and more a ritual, a practical humility that keeps cold gusts from barging inside. You start to feel oddly grateful for a place that requires you to stop pretending you are taller than you need to be. Sand drifts in gentle tongues along the edges of the lanes. In hollows where the wind pauses, it gathers into small crescents, the way a sleepy animal curls into any corner it can claim. Someone has brushed it back recently. You can see the fresh line where stone meets cleared earth, and the faint scuff marks of a sweeping branch or a worn mat dragged along the ground. The contest is quiet, endless, almost affectionate. Sand arrives, people clear it. Sand arrives again, unconcerned, like it is simply doing its job. When you pause and look back, the village reveals its logic. This is not a random scattering of rooms, it is an arrangement, a tight community designed to share shelter. The passageway spine keeps movement protected. The branching rooms keep households private. The low walls break the wind. The sun, when it comes, can slip in and warm the stones without the sea stealing it too quickly. Everything here is built to cooperate with the land instead of challenging it. And you sense something else, too, time's own habit of hiding and revealing. The dunes are soft, but they are powerful in their slow way. They can cover a roof, then a doorway, then an entire lane, turning lived-in rooms into sealed pockets of stillness. Then, in some later season, the sand can shift again and uncover a corner, as if the earth is opening one sleepy eye. Skara Brae is made to endure that cycle. It can be hidden without being destroyed. It can wait without being lost. You keep walking, one bend at a time, letting the maze become familiar. The more you trace it, the less it feels like a puzzle and more like a lullaby made of right angles and soft shadows. You are not solving anything tonight. You are simply learning the village's gentle geometry and noticing how, as you slow down, you begin to feel a little hidden, too. You keep walking the village's gentle bends, and the more you trace them, the more your body starts to behave like it belongs here. Your steps soften. Your shoulders remember to dip before stone asks you to. Even the seabirds overhead seem to slow their loops, as if they're matching your pace out of courtesy or out of pure laziness, an ancient talent they have refined to perfection. The wind keeps testing the dunes with patient fingers. It slides along the low walls, presses into corners, tries to sneak down the lanes like an uninvited thought. But the village answers with the same calm refusal every time: stone, earth, and a posture that stays humble. You notice how often the pathways tuck inward, how often a wall rises just enough to break the sharpest gust, how often an entrance is placed slightly aside, never directly in line with the open air. The whole place is a lesson in not arguing with weather. A few figures move ahead of you, locals, steady as the stones, wrapped in layered warmth that looks more like practical protection than fashion. They do not look hurried. They do not look surprised by the cold. Their movements suggest a long friendship with it, a relationship built on simple agreements. You can exist cold, but you will not be in charge. They glance toward you with a calm, assessing kindness, the way someone might regard a wandering seabird that has forgotten which season it is. With small gestures and unspoken invitation, they guide you toward a cluster of rooms where the air feels less sharp, where the wind loses its confidence at the threshold. You duck through a low doorway again, and once more the world changes. Outside, the air moves like a restless animal. Inside, it settles into stillness. The room is small, but it is not cramped. It is intentional. The stone walls hold the day's faint warmth in their memory, and the floor feels firm underfoot, not muddy, not shifting, as if someone has insisted that comfort should be built, not hoped for. At the center sits the hearthstone, darkened, familiar, quietly important. You can see the history of flame in it, soot kissed into the stone, edges smoothed by years of careful tending, a shallow basin where coals would nestle like sleeping creatures. The locals move around it with the kind of automatic respect you give to something that keeps you alive without needing praise. Their hands know the sequence of tasks. Their bodies keep a comfortable distance from the place where heat blooms, and yet everything they do seems oriented toward it, like planets circling a small sun. Fuel appears in compact pieces, dark, earthy, smelling faintly of wet ground and old plants. Peat, shaped and stacked. It looks unremarkable until you remember what it means. Stored summer, kept in the ground, carried home and offered to fire at the right moment. Someone places a piece near the coals, not dumping it in, but setting it with care, as if sudden change might offend the flame. A thin thread of smoke rises, and the room accepts it like a familiar guest. The roof above is low, layered, and practical. You can't see sky through it. You can, however, sense a small opening somewhere that lets smoke escape slowly, the way a sigh escapes when you finally stop pretending you're not tired. The smoke does not rush out. It lingers, curls, finds its path with patience. It leaves behind a warm scent, peat and ash, and something faintly sweet, like heather dried by time. The air is not perfectly clean. It doesn't try to be. It tries to be survivable, and strangely, that feels more honest. You feel heat gather at your shins first. Warmth here is humble, too. It does not leap dramatically. It rises in layers, like a blanket being pulled up inch by inch. Your hands hover near the fire's edge, and your fingers relax, loosening from whatever tight shape they carried in from the wind. You realize your body has been bracing against cold the way you brace against worries, constantly, quietly, without noticing. Now the hearth reminds you what it feels like to stop bracing. The locals show you without words how the room is arranged to keep that warmth close. Stone benches sit near the walls, positioned so bodies can lean and rest while still facing the hearth. The far corners stay cooler, reserved for storage and sleeping spaces where too much heat would become uncomfortable. Everything has its place. Warmth in the center, rest around it, work close by, and the outside world held politely at the doorway. It's a small system, balanced and calm, the way a good routine should be. Soot marks climb the stones above the hearth, soft and uneven. They are not ugly. They are proof. Proof that nights have been made gentler here, that storms have been waited out, that porridge has simmered long enough to become kind. You imagine mornings beginning with a careful coaxing of embers, a slow breath blown across coals that refuse to fully die, the smallest orange glow answering back. Fire, like tired people, doesn't always want to start again. It needs encouragement. It needs patience. It needs someone who doesn't take it personally. A bowl is set near the warmth, and the familiar scent returns. Grain thickening into porridge, steam rising like a soft promise. The steam drifts upward and mingles with the peat smoke, and the room becomes scented with comfort rather than hunger. You notice how the locals keep the pot close enough to warm, far enough not to scorch, turning it occasionally with the steady calm of people who know that rushing food is the easiest way to ruin both dinner and mood. Outside, the wind presses harder for a moment, and you feel it as a muted shiver through the stones. You might consider being impressed. The wind, after all, is persistent, but the village is more persistent. Stone and earth absorb the aggression and return it as silence. The seabirds continue their slow circles somewhere beyond the roof, calling once, then letting the sound fall away as if even they don't want to overdo it. You begin to sense the daily rhythm that lives beneath all this. Cold pushing in, warmth answering, damp air seeping, smoke drying, night arriving, fire held, morning returning, embers revived. It is not glamorous, it is not heroic, it is simply how people keep going when the sea is near and the sky is unpredictable. The logic is so comforting it almost feels like mercy. Stay low, share heat, keep the fire fed, keep the doorway narrow, keep the world manageable. And as you sit near the hearthstone, letting warmth collect in your bones, you realize something else. This is not just shelter from weather, it is shelter from excess. The room asks so little of you, only that you slow down, breathe, and accept the simple truth that being warm is enough for now. You let your eyelids grow heavy in the steady air, and the village keeps doing what it has always done, holding back the cold, one quiet stone at a time. Warmth gathers around your shins and then climbs, slow as sunrise, while the pot near the hearth keeps breathing out that steady porridge steam. The scent is so simple it feels like a spell that forgot to be dramatic. Grain, water, maybe a little milk when the day has been kind. You watch the surface thicken and relax with each patient stir, and you understand why this food has survived so many centuries of human ambition. It asks for almost nothing, and it gives you back the feeling of being looked after. Your stomach, which has been trying to stay polite, finally admits it notices. The locals move in that calm sequence that makes you realize you've been overcomplicating dinner your entire life. A handful of dried grain appears, not in a fancy jar, but in a simple container kept close to the heat so damp air doesn't spoil it. You see how they measure by habit rather than by obsession. No one is counting. No one is striving for perfection. The porridge is not a performance. It is a small, warm agreement between people and weather. Near the hearth you notice tools laid out with the same quiet care. A wooden stirrer darkened by years of use. A flat stone that serves as a lid, a plate, a heat shield, whatever the moment requires. A shallow bowl, sturdy and wide, that fits into hands like it was made to be held on cold mornings when your fingers don't want to cooperate. You think about how modern life invents objects for single purposes and then loses them. Here, a few things do many jobs, and they are treasured mostly because they keep working. You drift toward the doorway again, and the village gives you that familiar reminder to duck. Outside, the sea is still there, patient and busy, combing the shore. The seabirds loop overhead, occasionally dropping a call that lands on the dunes and slides away. The air smells of salt and wet stone, and something faintly green, as if the land is trying to keep its promise to grow despite everything. You follow the locals down a narrow lane toward the shoreline, where the wind has more room to stretch its arms. The cold nips at your cheeks, but now it feels less like an attack and more like a lively acquaintance, still rude but predictable. You can see why food matters here. Warmth is not just comfort, it is strategy. A full belly is a better roof than you'd think. At the water's edge, the world is textured with small offerings, dark rocks slicked with seaweed, shallow pools catching the sky, and pockets of sand that shift with every breath of tide. You crouch near a tide pool and watch tiny movements, little flickers of life that make the water seem awake. Shells cling to rock like stubborn jewelry. Some are smooth, some ridged, some spiraled like quiet thoughts. The locals show you where to look, and you realize gathering here is less about searching wildly and more about knowing the shoreline's habits, where the tide leaves gifts and where it keeps them. You pick up a shellfish from a cluster and feel its cool weight. Another comes free with a gentle twist. The act is oddly soothing. Reach, lift, place. Reach, lift, place. No rush, no wasteful theatrics. You can almost hear your old sense of urgency coughing and giving up somewhere behind you, finally defeated by the absolute slowness of a tide pool. Back toward the village, the shells are carried in a woven container that looks like it has learned to hold awkward shapes without complaint. Inside a sheltered space near the hearth, you see how the meal grows. Some shellfish are rinsed in fresh water, saved carefully, because water here is precious in the way you only understand when you have to carry it. Others are set aside for later, placed where air can dry them without the damp settling in. Nothing looks hurried, but everything looks purposeful, like a gentle routine repeated until it becomes reliable. You return to the warmth and the porridge, and now you notice more details. A flat grinding stone set near the wall, smoothed by countless passes of grain. A smaller hand stone that fits into palms like a quiet responsibility. You watch how grain can be crushed slowly into meal, how the work is steady rather than strenuous, and you realize that much of life here is built on patient friction, stone against grain, time against hunger, warmth against wind. Nearby are small tools, modest, sharp, well used. A stone blade that can slice, scrape, trim, and shape. A bone point thin enough to pierce hide or weave fibers through cloth. A little scraper that looks almost like a shell itself, curved and practical, made to clean and smooth without wasting effort. You run your fingers along a polished edge and think about how these tools carry the memory of hands, the way a well-worn stair carries the memory of feet. They are not flashy, they are dependable. They do not upgrade, they simply continue. You watch as a few shells are opened with practiced care. No messy struggle, no unnecessary force. The meat inside is treated like something valuable, because it is. The shells themselves don't go to waste either. Some become scoops, some become small containers for salt or fat. Some are simply kept, because even a hard, empty shell can still be useful in a place where the sea decides what you get. The porridge thickens, and the pot gives off a slower, heavier steam. A small portion of shellfish is added at the right moment, and the scent changes, still gentle but deeper now, the sea joining the grain like an old friend pulling up a stool by the fire. You feel the heat on your face and the cool air at your back, and the contrast makes everything sharper. The comfort of warm food, the honesty of stone walls, the soft insistence of seabird calls outside. You take in the scene as if you are learning a lullaby in a language older than your own. Food here is not an event, it is a rhythm. Gather, grind, stir, warm, share space, keep the fire, keep the tools close, keep the damp outside as much as you can, and accept that some of it will always slip in anyway, like worries, like weather, like sand. You do what you can, and you do it gently, and somehow that is enough. As you sit near the hearth, the bowl warm in your hands, you taste the village's quiet competence, grain softened into calm, sea tucked into sweetness, smoke threading through it all like the punctuation of survival. And you realize that if you were looking for a grand adventure, you have indeed come to the wrong place, because the greatest thrill here is a steady pot of porridge, a handful of shells, and the small tools that turn cold days into something you can get through with your shoulders relaxed. The warmth from the bowl lingers in your palms, and even after you set it down, your hands remember it, like they're holding on to the idea of comfort in case the wind tries to negotiate again. The hearth keeps its steady breathing, and you find yourself studying the room the way you might study a face you trust, not for glamour, but for the quiet details that say, "I will not let you fall apart here." Stone furniture surrounds you. That phrase sounds dramatic until you see it with your own sleepy eyes and realize it is the least dramatic thing in the world, just the village refusing to waste effort on stuff that doesn't last. Along the wall, a stone bed platform rises, solid and low, with edges worn smooth by years of shifting bodies and folded blankets. Nearby, a stone dresser is built right into the wall, broad shelves and box-like compartments carved from slabs, ready to hold whatever matters: tools, dried food, fibers, small treasures that don't need to be named. Everything is built in, as if the house itself has decided to take responsibility. You can almost feel the relief of it. No creaky chair to drag, no table to wobble, no frantic rearranging to make space. The space already knows what it is for. It has been practicing this for centuries, and it does not care about trends. You walk slowly, letting your fingertips skim the stone edges. They are not sharp. They have been softened by touch and time. There's a gentle dip where someone's elbow might rest while they work near the hearth, a shallow groove where a container fits perfectly, the stone remembering its shape like muscle memory. Even the corners feel considered, rounded a little, forgiving a shin, sparing you the unnecessary pain of banging into history. It's quietly funny how calming this is. You realize that much of your stress in modern life comes from things shifting around, objects breaking, arrangements changing, plans rearranging themselves at 3 a.m. like gremlins with a calendar. Here, the bed is always the bed. The shelf is always the shelf. The house is not going to surprise you. The house is not going to pivot. Near one wall is a built-in cupboard space, and you peer into it. It's cool inside, protected from the hearth's heat, a place for keeping dried grain, perhaps, or preserving something that shouldn't warm too quickly. The idea of storage here is not about accumulation, it's about survival and order. Not too much, not too little. Enough to get through the next stretch of rough weather, enough to keep the body steady and the mind unpanicked. You notice a few woven baskets tucked against stone, their fibers darkened by smoke and age. They sit like quiet animals curled in corners, waiting to be needed. In your mind, they hold shellfish gathered from the tide line, dried seaweed, bits of peat, perhaps some knitted or woven cloth. The baskets make soft shapes against the hard world. The contrast is comforting: stone for endurance, fiber for gentleness. The locals move through the room with familiar ease, and you begin to see how the furniture shapes their habits. Someone kneels by a stone shelf and sets down a tool without looking, because the hand already knows where it goes. Another smooths a blanket or a hide over the stone bed, layering softness on top of solidity. It is a simple act, but it carries a whole philosophy. You cannot change the wind, but you can arrange your life so it doesn't constantly slap you in the face. The hearth crackles with a soft, controlled sound. Smoke drifts upward and away. The porridge pot rests now, like a little moon of warmth. And you realize that routines here are not just schedules, they are anchors. Each object has a place. Each action has a sequence. The body relaxes because it doesn't have to guess. You sit on a stone bench near the wall. It is cold at first, the kind of cold that makes you inhale sharply and then regret the drama because it's not that bad. But after a moment, your body warms the surface, and it becomes tolerable, even reassuring. You can feel the stone under you, steady and indifferent, and that steadiness is oddly soothing. It reminds you that not everything in life needs to be soft to be supportive. Your eyes drift to the floor. It is not bare earth. It is packed, firm, and slightly textured, likely layered with materials that keep damp from rising too quickly. You notice how the room stays dry compared to outside, even with the sea so close. That's not luck. That's experience. Someone long ago learned what happens when damp creeps into bedding and clothing, and the village has been correcting that mistake ever since. You imagine the nightly routine: the hearth banked, embers tucked in ash, bedding laid out on the stone platforms, tools placed back on shelves, food stored away, the doorway secured. Each step is small, but together they form a calm perimeter around sleep. It's not a perfect defense against weather, but it's enough. Enough is a beautiful word when you're tired. The locals guide you through another adjacent room, and you see variations. Some houses have slightly different shelf arrangements. Some have more storage compartments. Some have more evidence of work: scraps of fiber, a polishing stone, a half-finished tool. The village is uniform in its logic, but personal in its details, like people who share the same language but tell different stories with it. You begin to feel the lullaby of habit here. The repetitive actions: stirring, sweeping sand, stacking peat, placing tools, are not mind-numbing, they are mind-settling. They teach the nervous system to stop scanning for surprises. Your breathing lengthens without you trying. Your thoughts begin to slow and widen, like a tide that has decided to stretch out and rest on the shore. It occurs to you that the stone furniture is more than practical. It is a promise. This place expects you to return. It expects bodies to lie down here again and again. It expects hands to reach for the same shelf and find the same tool. It expects life to continue, even if storms come, even if dunes shift, even if the sea roars louder than usual. Built into the walls is the belief that tomorrow will happen. You let that belief settle in your chest, warm as porridge. Outside, the seabirds keep looping, the wind keeps brushing the dunes, and the village keeps being small and stubborn and calm. You sit in the quiet room of stone and woven baskets and predictable shelves, and you feel something almost rare, your mind agreeing for once to stop gripping the day so tightly. Your mind agrees, for once, to loosen its grip, and in that loosened space, you notice the sound outside more clearly. The seabirds, persistent and unbothered, calling from the air as if they are counting time in their own lazy arithmetic. The village keeps its small calm around you, but the world beyond the stone walls is always moving. Wind, tide, cloud, salt. The locals do not treat that movement like an enemy. They treat it like a neighbor who drops by unannounced and expects to be fed. You rise from the stone bench and step back into the lanes, letting the cool air touch your warmed cheeks. The contrast is bracing in a gentle way, like dipping your fingers into cold water after holding a hot bowl. The dunes hold their soft ripples, the sea holds its steady breathing, and above it all, the birds loop and glide, never still, never truly frantic, always in motion with a purpose that feels older than most of your worries. The locals guide you toward a slightly higher stretch of ground, where the village's low stone shapes can be seen as a tucked-in cluster, and the shoreline opens wide. Here, the sky feels larger. The wind has more space to practice being wind, and the seabirds, gulls, terns, the larger ones with long wings that ride the air like it is something solid, begin to look less like background decoration and more like the village's living weather bells. You start to notice the patterns. When the air is steady, the birds spread out, each one claiming its own drifting path over the water. Their wings barely move, and they let the wind do the work, as if they're conserving energy for the important tasks in life, like being dramatic only when absolutely necessary. Their calls are sparse then, occasional notes that fall into the wind and dissolve. But when the wind shifts, the birds change first. You watch a cluster gather closer to shore, tightening their circles. Some fly lower, skimming the surface where the air feels heavier and more predictable. Others lift higher, catching a different current, testing the atmosphere like someone tasting soup to see if it needs more salt. Their bodies become little instruments measuring invisible changes. You realize that if you lived here, you would learn to watch the birds the way you watch your own breathing when you're trying to fall asleep. Subtle signs that tell you what the inside of the world is doing. The locals point their attention outward, toward the horizon. You follow their gaze and start to read the sea the way they do, not as a flat surface, but as a textured field of information. The swell lines come in at a certain angle, the foam gathers in certain places, the water darkens when a heavier wind presses it down. Even the smell changes, more kelp, more salt, more of that sharp, clean edge that suggests rain somewhere beyond sight. Clouds gather in layers above the sea. Some are thin and high, stretched like pale wool combed across blue. Others are lower, thicker, moving in slow, heavy shapes. You watch how the light changes when a cloud passes and how quickly it returns. The locals track this without fuss, as if the sky is a familiar face whose moods they can predict by the tilt of an eyebrow. You begin to understand that weather here is not a single event, It is a conversation. The sea speaks first with swell and smell and the way it throws its waves. The sky answers with cloud thickness and the direction of drift. The birds translate, adjusting their flight paths and calling patterns like living punctuation. And the village responds, not by panicking, but by adjusting routines. What to gather now, what to mend today, what to bring inside before the wind decides it wants to be rude. You walk along the edge of a rocky outcrop where tide pools catch the sky. In one pool, the surface is glassy, barely trembling. In another, it shivers with wind. You crouch and watch. Even tiny water tells you what the air is doing. It is almost embarrassing how much information you can get from paying attention, considering how often you live as if the world is just scenery. The seabirds shift again, and you see several land in a tight group on a sheltered patch of ground, tucking their heads into their feathers. That's a small sign, but it feels meaningful, like the moment you pull your blanket up a little higher and admit you want deeper rest. If birds start acting like they're ready to nap, it's probably not a bad idea for you to take the hint. A faint drizzle begins, so light it's almost polite. It doesn't soak you, it just makes the air taste damp and new. The locals do not react with surprise. They simply angle their bodies differently, turning shoulders into the wind, guiding you back toward the lanes where the stone walls break the weather into manageable pieces. You follow, and you realize that part of their skill is not resisting the elements, but cooperating with them, moving when movement helps, sheltering when shelter helps, accepting the rest. Back in the village, you notice small adjustments happening in the periphery. A woven basket is pulled closer to a doorway. A stack of peat is covered more carefully. A piece of cloth is shifted away from a draft. These are not dramatic preparations. No one is shouting, no one is making heroic gestures at the sky. It's simply the village doing what it always does. Anticipating, adapting, staying calm, because calm is efficient. A faint drizzle thickens briefly, then thins again, like the sky can't decide whether it wants to commit. The seabirds resume their slow loops, but lower now, closer to land. You watch them pass over the dunes, and you think of them as the village's floating calendar, not marking dates, but marking conditions. Their wings tell you whether tomorrow will be clear enough for gathering. Their calls hint whether a storm is building somewhere in the dark distance. Their habit of clustering warns you when the wind will change its mind and start pushing sand into your doorways again. You return to a sheltered spot near a house entrance and feel the warmth inside, waiting, steady as a remembered kindness. The village has taught you something without turning it into a lecture. Reading the world is a form of comfort. When you can sense what's coming, you don't have to be startled by it. You can prepare with small movements instead of big fear. And as you listen to the seabirds outside, weather bells ringing softly across the shoreline, you feel your own body fall into the same rhythm. Notice, adjust, rest. Let the wind do what it does. Let the stone hold you. Let the porridge steam return when it's time. Even the sky, with all its shifting moods, begins to feel less like a threat and more like part of the lullaby. The seabirds keep ringing their soft, restless bells outside. And inside the village, your body settles into the simple truth that comfort is often made, not found. The wind can decide to be moody, the sky can change its mind, sand can creep in like it pays rent, but hands can keep working, patiently, repeatedly, quietly. And if you watch long enough, you start to feel your own thoughts becoming less sharp around the edges, as if they too are being polished into something calmer. You move deeper into the cluster of houses where the air is steadier and the light turns gentle and dim, filtered through low entrances and drifting smoke. In a sheltered space near the hearth, you notice a small work area that feels both ordinary and sacred. No ceremony, just the careful arrangement of tools and materials. Stone grinding surfaces sit like flat moons on the floor. Bone points rest within reach. A few smooth pebbles and shells lie in a neat little scatter, not random, but chosen, each one shaped by the sea into the exact kind of curve that makes a hand relax. You kneel near a grinding stone and watch the slow work of turning something hard into something useful. Grain becomes meal, pigment becomes color, a rough edge becomes smooth. The rhythm is steady. Press, slide, lift. Press, slide, lift. The sound is soft, a sandy whisper that could easily be mistaken for the sea if you were half asleep. And you realize that this is how much of life is kept together here, by friction and patience, by accepting that the most important changes are often the least dramatic. A handstone fits into your palm with a familiar weight, as if it was made for you in some other life where you didn't have 1,000 notifications trying to make you anxious. You try the motion, slow and careful, and feel how your shoulders naturally drop. The movement doesn't allow for hurry. If you rush, the grain scatters. If you get aggressive, your wrists complain. The work forces you into the pace of the village, steady enough to make progress, slow enough to keep calm. It is strangely soothing, like a breathing exercise disguised as labor. Nearby, another kind of craft holds the air. Fibers, twisted and tamed into cord. You see strands laid out, some pale, some darker, perhaps from plant fibers or animal hair, prepared with a quiet knowledge of what holds and what breaks. The locals handle the fibers with the same careful confidence they use with fire. They don't yank or fight the material. They coax it. They twist it between fingers, rolling it into a tighter, stronger line, and the cord forms like a thought becoming organized. The motion repeats. Twist, roll, align. Twist, roll, align. It's hypnotic. You watch long enough that your own breathing begins to synchronize with it, as if your lungs are politely trying to participate. Cord is not glamorous, but here it's almost everything. Ties for bundles, lashings for repairs, nets for gathering, bindings for tools, loops for carrying. It's the quiet infrastructure of a life built without excess. You think, with a sleepy hint of sarcasm, that Cord had a marketing team, it would be unstoppable. Cord, holding your entire world together since forever. On a stone shelf, Small objects sit in various stages of becoming. A bone needle, thin, smooth, and precise, rests beside a chunk of antler that looks like it's waiting to be shaped into something else. A stone blade, carefully chipped, has edges that catch light like a whispered promise. You notice how each tool carries evidence of time: polish where hands grip, wear where it scrapes, tiny nicks where it has worked too hard and been forgiven anyway. You pick up a smooth pebble and run your thumb across it, imagining how it might be used to polish hide or soften rough fibers. The simple act of rubbing, repeated, patient, transforms texture. It turns stiff into supple, scratchy into wearable, harsh into kind. You understand why this kind of work fills so many hours. It isn't just production, it's maintenance of comfort in a world that would otherwise stay sharp. In another corner, shells and small stones are arranged like quiet ornaments. Some have been drilled or notched, ready to be strung. Others are simply beautiful in their natural shape: spirals, ridges, smooth discs, kept because the sea has already done half the artistry. You watch as a cord is threaded through a tiny opening, and a bead slides into place with a soft click. The sound is so delicate you almost miss it, but your mind catches it like a lullaby note. Even here, where survival matters, people still make room for small beauty, not as a luxury, but as a steadying thing. The hearth breathes, the smoke drifts, and the light flickers across the stone walls. Shadows move slowly, not like threats, but like blankets being rearranged. You begin to see how the crafts fit into the village's larger rhythm. When the tide is right, you gather. When the wind is harsh, you stay in and mend. When the rain insists, you polish and twist and grind until the day becomes something you can live inside. A simple net lies folded near a doorway. It's not small and consistent. You trace the pattern with your eyes and feel your brain relaxing into the logic of it. Over, under, pull through, tighten. Knot by knot, the net becomes reliable. And reliability here is more precious than drama. The sea can be generous, but it can also be stubborn. A net that holds means dinner. A net that fails means hunger. So the knots are tied with a tension that feels almost tender, like someone braiding calm into the fabric of the day. Your mind drifts back to the stone furniture, the built-in shelves, the steady bed platforms, and you realize these crafts are the softer layer laid over that hard endurance. Stone makes shelter. Craft makes it livable. Without cord, nothing stays tied. Without polish, nothing stays comfortable. Without grinding, nothing becomes edible. Without patient hours, the village would still exist, but it would be a colder, harsher version of itself. You notice how the locals' hands look. Strong, yes, but not rough in a careless way. They are the hands of people who repeat small motions until the motions become wisdom. There is no rush in their bodies, no frantic energy, just that steady competence that says, "We have done this before, we will do it again, and it will be enough." and something in you responds. Your own thoughts, usually so eager to sprint, begin to accept the village's pace. You let your attention rest on the repetition, the twist of fiber, the slide of stone, the smoothing of a tool, and the world narrows into something gentle and manageable. The seabirds call outside, the wind murmurs along the dunes, and inside the crafts continue like a quiet heartbeat. In that patient rhythm, you feel your mind soften, as if it is being worked by careful hands into a shape that can finally rest. Your mind is still being gently reshaped by repetition when the light outside begins to thin, the way a candle does when it finally decides it is done enough for one day. The seabirds keep looping, but their calls stretch farther apart now, as if even they are learning the ancient skill of not overcommitting. The wind doesn't stop. It never truly stops here, but it softens its edges, trading sharp gusts for a steadier push that feels more like background music than a challenge. Inside the houses, the air grows warmer and smokier, and the village turns toward evening with the quiet confidence of people who have done this exact transition 1,000 times. No one announces nightfall. No one treats it like a dramatic event. The day simply leans into dusk, and the village leans with it. You move back toward the hearth, and the smell of peat smoke folds around you like a familiar shawl. It's not a pristine scent. It carries earth and damp, and the faint sweetness of old plants compressed into fuel. But it's comforting precisely because it's honest. It smells like warmth that required effort. It smells like survival with a softer tone. The porridge pot sits close to the coals again, not necessarily because someone is still hungry, but because warmth is always being managed here, banked, saved, stretched. Even when the meal is finished, the heat continues working, drying air, soothing joints, keeping the room from slipping into damp cold. You notice how the locals handle embers as if they're handling time itself, never wasting it, never rushing it, simply nudging it into the shape they need. A few last tasks settle into place around you. Tools return to their stone shelves with the same quiet certainty as earlier. Cord is wound and tucked away so it doesn't tangle. Baskets are shifted closer to walls, away from drafts, as if the village is tucking in its own belongings before it tucks in its people. The lanes outside get brushed once more, not perfectly, but enough to keep sand from creeping too far overnight. The contest continues. Wind delivers, hands respond, and neither side makes it personal. You step to the doorway for a moment and let the outside air touch your face. The sea has darkened, turning into a broad, moving shadow, but you can still hear its calm insistence. Hush, pull, hush, like a bedtime voice that never gets tired of repeating itself. Salt sits on the breeze, clean and sharp, and it mixes with the smoke clinging to your clothes, creating a scent that feels like a signature of this place. Ocean and hearth, cold and warmth, open world and small shelter. Above, the sky is a slow gradient of dim color, and the seabirds, finally, begin to settle. Some drift toward rocks and sheltered dips in the landscape. Others vanish into the distance like thoughts that don't need to be followed. Their calls become occasional, almost lazy, as if they're whispering instead of speaking. You realize you've started measuring time the way the village does, not by clocks, but by changes in air, light, and sound. Back inside, the room's shadows lengthen. Firelight flickers across stone walls, turning the built-in shelves into soft shapes that seem to breathe. The built bed platforms wait, layered now with hides and woven mats, softness laid over endurance, the same principle you saw in the crafts. The bedding is not luxurious in a showy way, but it's purposeful. It offers insulation, texture, and the simple kindness of something that keeps your body from losing heat too quickly. You sit near the hearth and notice how quiet the night becomes when there is no pressure to fill it. No one tells stories for entertainment like a performance. No one stages spectacle. The village doesn't need a grand finale to the day. The day has already done its work. The night is allowed to be what it is, a long stretch of darkness held gently at bay by a small fire and shared routine. There is a particular kind of peace in storyless time. Your mind, so used to chasing plot, begins to fidget at first, like it's searching for something to solve. Then it realizes there is nothing to solve. The roof is steady, the doorway is narrow, the embers are safe, the tools are put away. The sand has been pushed back for now. The sea can do what it does. The wind can practice its endless persuasion. Inside, the village has created a pocket of stillness, and you, slightly to your surprise, are invited to join that stillness without having to earn it. You listen to small sounds, the soft crackle of peat, the faint scrape of a mat being adjusted, the whisper of fibers settling as someone lays down their woven work. These sounds don't demand attention. They simply exist, and that is precisely why they calm you. They are the audio equivalent of a warm bowl, simple, steady, enough. Your body begins to imitate the village's approach to night. You shift closer to the warmth, then farther, finding the sweet spot where your cheeks feel warm and your back doesn't feel drafted. You notice your breathing deepen and slow, not forced, just natural, as if the air itself is heavier and more forgiving here. The smoke scent lingers, and instead of irritating you, it makes you feel held, like the village is wrapping you in its own history, gently, without asking for gratitude. You think fleetingly about how modern nights are often loud even when they're silent, full of scrolling, noise, light, the anxious need to do something even while resting. Here, the night is not a container for productivity. It is a place to stop. And the village seems to say, with patient sarcasm, that if you can't stop on your own, it will gladly stop you. The low doorway already trained you to bow. The repetitive crafts already trained you to slow. Now the darkness trains you to release. The seabirds outside call once, far away, like a last check-in. The sea answers with its own steady hush. Inside, embers glow red under ash, their light dimming and brightening in small pulses like a sleepy heartbeat. You lie down on the layered bedding, feeling the firmness of stone beneath softness, and you understand the village's final lesson for the day. You don't need a dramatic ending to feel complete. You just need warmth, shelter, and permission to be quiet. And as the smoke thins and the salt air fades at the doorway, Skara Brae holds you in its small, patient night. No spectacle, no hurry, only the gentle continuation of life that knows how to rest. Morning arrives the way it always does here, without ceremony, without urgency, just a slow brightening that makes the stone edges look softer and the smoke seem thinner. The embers under the ash are still alive, glowing faintly like a sleepy heartbeat that never fully stopped. Someone nudges them back to confidence with practiced care, and soon the hearth is breathing again, warmth rising in layers the way it did yesterday. First at your shins, then at your hands, then into the quiet spaces behind your ribs where cold likes to hide. Outside, the sea keeps its steady hush and pull, and the seabirds resume their looping, ringing those gentle weather bells as if they're clocking in for another calm shift. The village wakes into routine, small movements, familiar placements, the comforting sound of fibers settling and stone receiving tools back onto shelves. The porridge pot returns to its place, steam curling up like a soft ribbon you could almost tie around your thoughts to keep them from scattering. You sit up on the stone platform layered with hides and woven mats, and for a moment everything feels perfectly arranged. Stone, warmth, smoke, salt air, until your hand moves to fasten the wrap you've been using against the wind. And then you feel it, the absence where a small object should be. It's not a grand loss. It's not the kind of missing thing that makes the whole village gasp and point at the horizon. It's smaller than a finger, lighter than a shell, and yet it matters because it holds your warmth together. A pin, bone or antler, smooth and simple, the kind you hardly notice until you need it. Last night it was there, doing its humble job, keeping your wrap from sliding off your shoulder and your dignity from flapping around like a startled seabird. Now, in the calm morning light, it has vanished. Your first instinct is the old one, a quick, anxious scan, as if your eyes can bully reality into cooperating. You pat the bedding, you check the fold of cloth, you look near the hearth where you sat. Nothing. The village, in its quiet way, seems amused, not cruelly, just with that gentle truth that small things go missing in a world full of sand, smoke, and shadow. If you were hoping for a dramatic quest, you have once again chosen the wrong place. The only adventure on offer is the slowest treasure hunt in human history. You take a breath and let the village teach you how to search without turning it into stress. First, you make the space calm. You smooth the bedding, lifting and setting the hides with care so anything small doesn't get tossed into a corner like an afterthought. You run your fingertips along the stone platform edges, feeling for the tiny, cool bump of the pin lodged in a seam. You check the shallow grooves near the wall where objects naturally settle, as if the house itself keeps pockets. Still nothing. You shift your attention to the stone shelves and built-in compartments. You remember how everything here has a place, how hands set tools down without looking because the body already knows where they belong. If the pin fell, it likely followed the same logic, rolling toward a familiar edge, slipping into a predictable hollow, obeying gravity like it's the only rule worth respecting. You move slowly from shelf to shelf, letting the morning light do the work. A thin beam of sun finds its way inside and stretches across stone, revealing dust, ash, and faint grit. You look for anything that breaks the texture, anything too smooth, too pale, too shaped. Your eyes adjust to the dimness, and you realize you're using the same skill the locals use to read the sky and the sea, noticing subtle changes instead of demanding obvious answers. You find a few small things, an extra twist of cord, a shell scoop tucked away, a polished pebble that feels comforting in your palm, but not the pin. The search spreads gently outward. You step into the passageway, where the floor is packed firm and the lane bends like a calm thought turning a corner. Sand has crept in overnight in thin tongues along the wall edges, because of course it has. Sand never sleeps, it just changes shifts. You look down and imagine the pin falling from your wrap as you moved, making a tiny, quiet landing, then disappearing under a dusting of grit like a secret being filed away. The locals, still wordless, still steady, begin to help in the way they do everything, with method, not panic. A sweeping bundle appears, and sand is brushed back carefully, not in a wild scatter, but in controlled strokes that keep small objects from being flung into the universe. The lane's surface reveals itself in patches, stone, packed earth, tiny shell fragments that glitter faintly like trapped starlight. You kneel and search close to the ground, because anything important here is usually near the ground. You look at the base of walls where the sand gathers. You check the shallow dips where feet have worn the path. You follow the line from your doorway to the hearth room, tracing your own recent movements as if you're reading a map drawn in scuffs and soft footprints. A gentle humor settles over you as you realize what you've become, a very tired detective in a village that does not believe in drama. Your grand clue is the floor. Your exciting reveal is more sand. You probably won't survive this, in the sense that your impatience is going to collapse quietly in a corner and never be seen again. You return inside and try another approach, listening. Small metal would ring. Bone doesn't ring, but it does make a particular sound when it taps stone, soft, dry, precise, like a tiny knock. You lift the edge of a woven mat and let it settle again, watching and listening. You shift a basket slightly and hear the gentle clack of shells, the hush of fiber. You move a hide and it sighs against stone. Then a faint, unmistakable click. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. Your gaze drops to a narrow gap between the stone bed platform and the wall, one of those places that exists purely to humble you. There, half hidden in shadow, is the pin. It has rolled into the perfect little pocket of safety, as if it wanted to be found, but also wanted to make sure you earned it with patience. You reach in and your fingers close around it. The pin is cool and smooth, lighter than you expected, and for a second you hold it like it's more valuable than it has any right to be, not because it's precious in itself, but because you now understand what it represents. Warmth kept in place, routine restored, the small order that lets the day feel manageable. You slide it back into your wrap, fastening cloth to shoulder, and the simple security of it makes you exhale longer than you realize. The village returns to its steady rhythm as if nothing happened, because for it, nothing truly did. A small item went missing, a calm search unfolded, it was found, life continues. Outside, the seabirds keep circling, weather bells ringing softly over the sea. Inside, the hearth breathes, and porridge steam curls upward, and your mind, strangely satisfied, settles even deeper, not from excitement, but from the quiet relief of a tiny problem solved gently, without hurry, without noise, and without the unnecessary suffering of pretending everything has to be a grand adventure. The pin sits back where it belongs, and the wrap settles against your shoulder like a relieved sigh. For a moment, you simply enjoy the quiet victory. Small, tidy, thoroughly uncinematic. Then, as the village resumes its steady rhythm around you, a softer realization arrives. You didn't just find a missing thing. You learned how this place leaves clues without meaning to. The way sleep leaves clues in your face when you finally stop pretending you're fine. You step back into the lane, and now you look down with new respect for the ground. Yesterday it was just a path. Today it is a gentle record keeper. The packed earth holds faint impressions where feet have passed. The sand drifts in thin sheets along the edges and gathers in little crescents where wind loses interest. The village floor is not clean enough to be sterile and not messy enough to be chaotic. It sits in that perfect middle space where ordinary life leaves readable marks. You follow the route you took during the search, but this time you don't search with urgency. You search with curiosity, slower, softer, as if you're listening with your eyes. The lane shows you the story of movement, a scuff where a heel pivoted, a dragged line where someone pulled a basket, a brushed patch where the sweeping bundle passed through like a calm broom of time. A fresh sweep mark runs along the wall edge, thin and parallel like the village underlining a sentence. The sand there is lighter, newly disturbed, and you can see where it has been pushed into a small ridge. That ridge is a boundary, a little sand dune in miniature, and it tells you something important. Anything small that rolls will stop there. The village doesn't need a sign that says, "Lost objects may collect here." The ground already says it, quietly, in the language of physics and habit. You step forward and notice your own footprints, softened but still present. They are not deep. They are the kind made by someone who's been taught to walk gently without trying. Even your toes have started behaving differently here, landing with less insistence. Your prints drift close to the wall in places because the lane subtly guides you there, and that matters. Close to the wall, the sand is deeper, a little looser, and small things can vanish into it more easily. You imagine the pin slipping free, landing with a tiny click, then nudged by a footstep's vibration, then rolling toward the wall where the sand waits like a quiet thief. You crouch and look for the tiniest details. A small crescent-shaped divot in the sand suggests where something light bounced once before settling. A faint line, almost invisible, suggests a roll. It's delicate evidence, the kind you'd miss if you were moving too fast or thinking too loudly. You realize how often you miss your own life's evidence for the same reason, Too fast, too loud, too busy being sure. The locals pass through the lane and you watch their feet. They step with certainty, but not with force. Their prints are consistent, purposeful, angled to avoid the loosest sand. They know which parts of the path stay firm after rain and which parts turn treacherous underfoot. They don't need to announce this knowledge. Their bodies simply carry it, like a lullaby carried in muscle memory. One of them pauses near a corner where the lane bends and the wall rises slightly. Without a word, they gesture with a small, economical motion toward the base of the wall, where sand naturally gathers. It's the kind of gesture that says, this is where things end up, if they're going to end up anywhere. You look closer and see it, how the corner creates a tiny wind shadow, a pocket where sand collects and stays. It's a perfect trap for a pin, a bead, a small tool, a moment of carelessness. You follow that logic down the lane, where the wall bulges, sand piles, where the ground dips, grit settles. Where a doorway narrows, movement slows, and scuffs appear. Each feature becomes a clue not just about where people walk, but how they walk, where they pause, where they turn, where they shift a basket from one hand to the other. You start to see why the village is shaped the way it is, not just for shelter, but for predictability. Predictability makes life calmer. It also makes life easier to read. You stop near the house entrance you used earlier and look at the threshold. The packed earth here is slightly smoother, worn by countless dips of shoulders and careful steps. A faint semicircle of scuff marks suggests where feet tend to shuffle as people duck through. That's a prime location for accidental losses. When you bend, your clothing shifts. When clothing shifts, small things slip. The doorway is not just an entrance, it's a place where the body changes shape and where belongings can quietly rebel. You imagine the pin's little journey again, how it might have slipped free as you adjusted your wrap, fallen near the threshold, then been gently pushed along by your own careful step, then rolled toward the wall where sand waited like a quiet thief. It isn't a dramatic story, but it is a coherent one, and coherence is deeply soothing. Your nervous system loves a world it can understand. The seabirds call outside, faint and far, and the sound blends with the soft scrape of sweeping as someone tidies another stretch of lane. The sweeping marks are fresh, and they create their own language, wide arcs where sand is pushed away, sharper lines where bristles catch on grit, a clean patch where stone peeks through like a memory resurfacing. You begin to respect the broom as a kind of quiet historian. It reveals what was hidden. It redraws the village each day without erasing its shape. You drift along, reading footprints the way you now read clouds and birds, slowly, patiently, letting patterns emerge. Some footprints are heavier, suggesting someone carrying weight. Some are lighter, quicker, suggesting someone moving without a bundle. In one place, a set of footprints veers slightly, then returns to the main line, and you imagine a brief pause to pick something up, to check a basket, to adjust a cord. The ground is full of small decisions made without fanfare. And your mind, always craving meaning, tries to inflate this into something grand. You almost laugh, quietly, internally, because the village gently refuses. It's not a mystery epic. It's not a heroic tracking tale. It's simply people moving through a shared space, leaving marks because they exist, and tidying because they care. The clues are not there to entertain you. They are there because life happens. Still, there is comfort in the skill. You realize that if something goes missing again, and in a world with sand, smoke, and narrow doorways, it absolutely will, you won't need to panic. You will look down. You will notice the drift lines, the scuffs, the corners where sand collects. You will follow the gentle logic of the lane. You will let the village's geometry and the ground's memory narrow the world into something findable. You stand and take one last slow look at the path, and it feels like looking at your own thoughts after they've settled overnight. The surface is not perfectly smooth, but it is readable. The chaos is not total. The pattern is there, waiting for you to slow down enough to see it. Then you turn back toward the hearth warmth, wrap secure, mind quieter than before, as seabirds ring softly over the sea, and Skara Brae continues doing what it does best, teaching you with sand and stone how to move through a day without losing yourself. You head back toward the hearth with that small, tidy satisfaction still warming your chest. But Skara Brae never lets comfort pretend the world has stopped moving. The sea stays close, and the seabirds keep ringing their soft bells over the shoreline, adjusting their loops whenever the wind changes its mind. Outside, clouds thicken into layered grays, and the water turns darker, almost metallic. The locals begin to drift toward the shore with quiet coordination, no alarm, just purposeful movement. You follow and see the first practical truth. The waterline has climbed. Stones that were dry earlier now shine wet, the tide tasting them as politely as it can manage. The tide is turning. It arrives the way tiredness arrives when you keep insisting you're fine. Slow at first, then suddenly obvious. Each wave reaches a little farther, retreats, then returns with renewed confidence. The problem isn't dramatic. It's simply the sea rewriting the boundary while everyone else is trying to keep the day steady. Outside, clouds thicken into layered grays, and the water turns darker, almost metallic. The locals begin to drift toward the shore with quiet coordination, no alarm, just purposeful movement. You follow and see the first practical truth. The waterline has climbed. Stones that were dry earlier now shine wet, the tide tasting them as politely as it can manage. The tide is turning. It arrives the way tiredness arrives when you keep insisting you're fine. Slow at first, then suddenly obvious. Each wave reaches a little farther, retreats, then returns with renewed confidence. The problem isn't dramatic. It's simply the sea rewriting the boundary while everyone else is trying to keep the day steady. Near the shore, useful things have been left to dry in salt air and brief sun. A folded net stretched over rocks, loops of cord laid out to loosen, a basket turned upside down to shake out dampness. A few small tools rest on a flat stone, bone points and chipped blades placed where wind can dry them. The morning felt safe. The tide disagrees. You crouch and watch a wave reach. Foam slides in and stops short. The next wave touches the rock and leaves a dark shine. Another reaches farther. You can almost feel the village's calculations settle into place. Move now, keep what matters. Wait too long, and the sea will accept your donation without sending a thank you. So you help in the only way that makes sense here, carefully, not heroically. You lift the nearest loop of cord, cool and damp against your fingers, and carry it to higher ground where wind can still do its slow work. You gather the net's edge and ease it off the stones. It snags once on a rough corner, and you slow down because tearing a net is the kind of mistake that turns a calm day into an unnecessary hunger problem. The locals work beside you with steady efficiency. A basket is flipped upright and carried. Seaweed is moved to a higher rock. A small tool is tucked into a cloth fold. The rhythm is soothing, even as the tide creeps closer. Lift, shake, carry, set. Lift, shake, carry, set. It's the same repetition as grinding grain or twisting fiber, only with water providing the soundtrack. The wind strengthens and presses at your back like a firm hand, urging you to hurry. Seabirds call louder for a moment, and your wrap flutters. Your fingers brush the pin at your shoulder, secure, present, found. And that earlier search suddenly feels like training. Losing a pin was annoying. Losing a net, cord, or tool would be worse. In this village, small objects are quiet pillars holding up comfort. A stronger wave breaks higher and sends a thin sheet of water farther up the rocks. It drains back, leaving slickness that makes footing uncertain. You shift to firmer ground. Driftwood bumps and pivots in the rising water, and one long piece swings toward the drying area like it is trying to be included. You move quicker, still calm, but no longer leisurely. Lift the last loose mesh, fold the net into a compact bundle, and carry it back toward the lanes where low walls break the wind. Now the task changes from rescuing to securing. Cord is looped around heavy stones so bundles won't scatter in gusts. Baskets are set in sheltered hollows where sand and wall make a natural pocket. The smallest tools are moved inside and placed on higher shelves, away from damp air and the sea's curiosity. You return once more to the shore for the final pieces. One bone point, one small blade, one smooth polishing pebble warmed briefly by sun. Each object is handled with careful respect, not worship, just awareness. These are not replacements waiting somewhere convenient. They are companions of work, shaped by hands, kept through seasons. The tide keeps climbing. You watch it cover the flat stone where the tools had rested earlier, swallowing the spot without fuss. The sea is not angry. It is simply doing what it does, and the village refuses to take it personally. That refusal feels like a quiet secret to restful living. When the last item is safe, everyone steps back and reassesses. The boundary moved quickly, but the response stayed small and coordinated. No drama, no wasted motion. The wind eases as if satisfied. Seabirds widened their circles again, calls thinning into the distance, and you feel your shoulders release tension you didn't notice you were carrying. You walk back through the lane as the low walls guide you into shelter. Behind you, the tide continues rising, but it rises without taking what you need. Inside, the hearth waits, smoke thin and familiar. Warmth returns to your shins, and you let the day continue, not conquered, not defeated, simply managed, one careful movement at a time. Warmth returns to your shins as you settle near the hearth again, and for a moment it feels like the day has been neatly folded back into place. Tools safe, cords looped, net bundled, sea kept politely at a distance. The smoke thins and rises in patient spirals, and the porridge pot breathes out a familiar steam that seems to say, yes, you can stop scanning the horizon now. Then the wind answers with a small, stubborn thump against the outer wall. Nothing violent, just a reminder that weather doesn't need to shout to be persuasive. You notice it in the ceiling first, not as a visible hole, but as a change in sound. The roof has its own voice, a muted hush when it's snug, a faint rattle when something is loose, a soft sigh when the wind finds a seam and tries to whistle through it. Today, the hush has a thin edge. Something is shifting above you, driftwood, turf, maybe a stone slab settling wrong. The village has been through countless days like this, and it responds the same way every time, calmly, immediately, without treating it as a tragedy. The locals tilt their attention upward, and you follow, eyes adjusting to the dimness. In the hearthlight, you can see where smoke usually threads out through a small opening, carefully managed, never too large. That opening is part of how the house breathes, the way a person breathes under a blanket, not wide open, not suffocating, just enough exchange to keep everything alive. But now the draft is slightly different. Smoke drifts sideways before it rises. A thin ribbon of cooler air brushes the back of your neck. It doesn't feel dangerous yet, but it feels like a warning, a gentle tap on the shoulder from the building itself. You step out into the lane, ducking the low doorway as if your spine has finally learned some respect. Outside, the sky has turned heavier. The dunes hold their soft ripples, but the wind presses them with more insistence. Seabirds circle lower, weather bells sounding faintly sharper, and the sea keeps doing its steady math at the shoreline. The village's low roofs sit like tucked-in shoulders, layered and humble, built to endure but never immune to needing care. A few people move toward one of the houses with a bundle of materials, and you follow, feeling that familiar, calm efficiency. There is no announcement, no panic. Roof maintenance is simply part of life here, like brushing sand from the lane or banking embers at night. If you want a glamorous adventure, you keep choosing the wrong century. Today's excitement is roof behaves slightly worse than yesterday. You reach the house and see the problem clearly. A section of the roof covering has shifted, likely nudged by wind and damp, loosening a seam where turf meets stone. It's small, no collapse, no dramatic hole to the sky, just a vulnerable spot where rain could seep in, where wind could push smoke back into the room, where damp could creep toward bedding and turn cozy into, why are we living in a sponge? The locals move with practiced routine. Someone brings a length of driftwood, pale and salt-scar, shaped by the sea into a beam-like curve. Another has fresh turf, thick, dark, alive with earth smell, cut into manageable slabs. A few flat stones are gathered too, not heavy boulders, but the kind that sit well, that know how to stay where they're placed. Everything here is about layers. Stone for structure, wood for spanning, turf for insulation, and careful placement for stubbornness. You crouch near the roof edge and watch how the first piece is eased into position. Driftwood slides into a slot where it can brace and distribute weight. Simple engineering made gentler by years of repetition. You help lift one end, feeling the rough salt texture under your fingers. The wood is surprisingly light for how important it is. It doesn't need to be massive, it needs to be exactly enough. Then turf comes next, laid like thick blankets. The smell of it is rich and grounding. Wet soil, crushed grass, the quiet promise of warmth held in organic layers. You realize why turf matters. It doesn't just cover, it insulates. It slows the wind's attempts to steal heat. It absorbs some rain, then dries when the air gives it a chance. It's living material turned into shelter without becoming artificial. It makes the roof feel like a continuation of the land rather than a defiant barrier against it. You place a slab carefully, aligning edges so there's no obvious seam for the wind to pry apart. The motion is slow, precise. You don't toss turf down, you settle it. Your hands press it gently so it seats against the layer beneath, and the roof responds with a quiet, satisfying stability. A flat stone is placed on top as a weight, not to crush, but to hold, like a calm hand on the shoulder of something that might otherwise wander off. The house, you realize, is not sealed the way modern buildings brag about being sealed. It is managed. It breathes on purpose. Smoke needs an escape route, or the room becomes a fog of irritation. Cold air needs to be kept out, but not so tightly that damp turns everything into clammy misery. The roof and walls work together like a slow, careful system. Small gaps where air can move, thick layers where heat can be held, and an opening that lets smoke leave without inviting the entire weather forecast inside. You watch the smoke hole area, and the locals adjust it subtly. Nothing dramatic, just ensuring the opening remains clear and correctly edged. A stone is nudged to redirect a draft. A turf slab is shifted slightly so rain will run off instead of pooling. It's all micro decisions, the kind that seem boring until you remember that comfort is made of 1,000 small choices done consistently. As you work, the wind pushes again, testing the fresh placement. The seabirds call once, low and brief, as if offering a review. The turf holds, the stones stay. The driftwood brace does its quiet job. Inside the house, the draft changes immediately. The smoke rises more cleanly, and that thin, cool brush at the back of your neck disappears. The room's hush returns, the sound of a roof that's snug again. You step inside and feel the difference in your body before you fully register it in your mind. Warmth gathers more evenly. The hearth seems calmer. The flame no longer tugged sideways by an unwanted seam. Even the smell improves. Less damp edge, more peat and comfort. You think of your lost pin from earlier and feel a little amused, how the day has been full of small restorations. Find the pin, secure the net, mend the roof. Nothing heroic, everything essential. And in the quiet after, you understand what the village has been teaching you all along. Endurance isn't one grand act, it's maintenance. It's noticing a draft before it becomes misery. It's placing turf so rain slides away instead of soaking in. It's letting a house breathe, but only as much as it needs. It's the calm, stubborn art of making life livable in a place where wind never truly quits. The seabirds continue circling beyond the doorway, weather bells softened again. The dunes keep their slow, shifting watch. Inside, the repaired roof holds steady above you, and the village settles back into routine with the gentle confidence of something that knows how to last. Stone by stone, layer by layer, breath by breath. The roof holds steady above you, and the house settles into its familiar hush. Warmth spreads more evenly from the hearth, and peat smoke rises cleanly instead of drifting sideways. Outside, the wind continues its endless practice, softened by stone and turf, while seabirds circle in wider loops, their calls spaced like slow chimes. With the shoreline bundles hauled above the tide and the roof seam tucked snug again, the day slides into a gentler mode. The locals guide you back toward the hearth, and the air carries that mix of salt, smoke, and warm grain. Your feet remember the bends of the lanes. Your shoulders dip automatically at each low doorway. You brush your fingers across the pin at your shoulder and feel it secure, a small reminder that calm solutions exist, even for small annoyances. A pot returns to the coals, and porridge begins its patient thickening. Steam rises in slow spirals, and your stomach answers with quiet approval. Food here never arrives as a performance. It grows from the day's work, grain stored carefully against damp, shellfish gathered when the tide permits, fish taken when the sea allows it, fats used sparingly when they can be spared. You watch hands move with the same tidy logic you've seen everywhere. Tools on shelves, cords coiled, turf aligned. A handful of meal slides into the pot, and the stirrer circles until the surface turns glossy and calm. Shellfish, cleaned earlier, are folded in at the right moment so they soften without disappearing. The scent deepens, grain and smoke, with a gentle salt edge that anchors you to the shore. A flat stone warms near the fire, ready to receive small portions so no one has to rush or fumble in the heat. The room arranges itself for sharing without anyone needing to announce it. Bodies gather at respectful distances, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to stay comfortable. Stone benches and platforms become seats. Woven mats soften hard surfaces. Someone slides a hide into place so the cold of stone doesn't climb into your bones. It is offered the way the village offers everything, quietly, as if this is simply how the day should settle. Bowls appear, sturdy, familiar, warmed at the base by their proximity to the fire. You take one, and heat seeps into your palms. The porridge is thick and steady, mild sweetness from grain balanced by the deeper note of smoke. The sea's contribution stays subtle, just enough to remind you where you are, close to water, close to wind, close to a rhythm that decides what the day will allow. You eat slowly, not out of etiquette, but because the food invites slowness. Each spoonful feels like a quiet agreement made inside your body. Warmth spreads from hands to throat to chest, smoothing you from the inside, the way a polishing stone smooths rough fiber. Your shoulders drop another notch. Your breathing lengthens. Even your thoughts settle, as if they've been stirred into something calmer. The earlier worries lose their bite. The missing pin becomes a lesson in patience rather than a story of inconvenience. The rising tide becomes another pattern remembered. Move what matters, let the sea do what it does. The roof's brief rattle becomes proof that shelter isn't magic, it is maintenance. Now, with food warming the room and your body, you feel the village closing the loop. Work answered by rest, worry answered by nourishment. Hearthlight flickers across stone walls and built-in shelves, and shadows move like slow water. Your eyes land on the quiet evidence of the day being handled, cord tucked neatly away, the net folded and safe, small tools resting where hands can find them again. You almost smile at how unglamorous it all is. If you came seeking epic adventure, you have instead found porridge and organization, and your appetite for drama begins to yawn. When the bowl's empty, the pot is moved a little farther from the coals to keep it warm without rushing it into bitterness. A portion is set aside, stored carefully, because the village plans for tomorrow the same way it repairs a roof, by doing a small, sensible thing before it becomes urgent. The room remains steady, warm, smoke-thin, calm. Outside, seabirds call only now and then, and the sea continues its hush and pull, like a lullaby that never forgets the melody. You sit back and let the heat of food and fire settle into you. Gratitude rises, not dramatic, just physical thankfulness for being sheltered and fed. The village doesn't demand that you name it or perform it. It simply continues, stone by stone, breath by breath, giving you permission to be quietly satisfied. And in that satisfaction, you understand the feast for what it truly is, the ordinary done well. One warm bowl, one steady hearth, and your tired mind remembering how to rest. You sit back after the last warmth of porridge, and the room holds a quiet pause where nobody needs anything urgently. The hearth breathes low heat, smoke rises thin and obedient. Your shoulders stay lowered, as if the village has unbuckled a pack you forgot you were wearing. Then the wind changes its tone. It doesn't turn violent, it simply grows more insistent, like a patient hand pushing at the dunes until they agree to move. Outside, seabirds widen and tighten their circles in slow negotiation with the air. You feel a cooler draft slide along the doorway and then soften again, stone and turf calmly doing their work. You step out into the lane, wrap pinned neatly at your shoulder, and the dunes catch your eye immediately. Afternoon leans toward evening, and the sand glows with muted gold beneath a gray sky, ridges combed into ripples. The dunes look like blankets, soft, forgiving, almost inviting you to lie down and let the world cover you. But you already know what blankets can do when they slide over your face. Sand arrives without drama. It drifts in thin sheets as if the wind is making the village's bed. Along the base of the walls, new crescents have formed since the last sweep. In a lane bend, a deeper pocket gathers where the wind pauses. Your steps and the old sweep marks are already being softened, the ground quietly rewriting itself grain by grain. The locals respond the way they always do, calm, immediate, untheatrical. A reed brush appears, tough stems bound together, and someone begins sweeping the lane edge. The sound is a soft hiss, like a whisper being pushed aside. You join in, because once you start helping here, your body begins to crave tasks that end cleanly. You sweep in controlled strokes, not flinging sand wildly. The missing pen taught you that panic scatters more than it saves. Slow keeps things findable. So you push the drift back toward the dune side, building a low ridge where it can sit for a while. The work is repetitive and oddly comforting, like grinding grain or twisting cord, only lighter, as if you are combing the landscape's hair. A gust smooths one dune crest and sharpens another. A small slide runs down the face with a sound like dry rain. It's beautiful, soft motion, effortless change, yet you can feel how easily that beauty becomes inconvenience, then risk. A doorway that asks you to duck is gentle instruction. A doorway that disappears under sand is something else entirely. You follow the lane toward a covered passage and find the day's small problem waiting. Sand has pushed farther in. The passage isn't blocked, but it has narrowed. The floor is raised by a shallow drift, and you have to step higher to pass. It feels minor until you imagine it happening again and again, each night tucking the village in tighter, each wind laying down a new layer, until a lane becomes a mound. You crouch and touch the sand. It's cool, fine, almost silky, slipping between your fingers with easy confidence. You think of the tide earlier, how water climbed the rocks without anger, and realize sand is the land's version of that patience. It doesn't need to roar to win. It only needs time. The locals clear the passage with the same method you've watched all day. Sand is pushed back in small amounts. A couple of flat stones are placed where the drift begins, breaking the wind close to the ground so the next gust drops its sand a little off to the side instead of in the center. You help set a stone, its surface damp cool from sea air, and feel how such a small interruption changes the drift's shape. Minute by minute, the passage becomes passable again. The doorway's base reappears. Nothing is defeated. The village has simply nudged the world back toward livable, the way it nudged embers back to flame and turf back into place on the roof. The light flattens for a moment, and the dunes turn almost silver, a field of quiet waves. Seabirds call from farther out, their sound skimming the sand. The coastline looks dreamlike, combed into calm. So lovely you could almost forget that this same softness can bury a step, blur a threshold, and seal a room. That thought doesn't frighten you so much as it makes you attentive. You take one last slow walk along the lanes, checking the thresholds, noticing where drifts grow quickest, where corners collect too easily. You adjust one small thing, shift a basket higher, brush a doorway clear, nudge a stone marker straighter, and feel that familiar relief of prevention, the small, sensible act done before urgency arrives. As evening approaches, the sweeping slows. The stones sit in their new positions like quiet punctuation. The lanes look clearer, passable again, as if the village has been gently unblanketed. The dunes, of course, do not stop being dunes. They will shift again. They will keep their soft beauty and their soft warning in the same breath. And you carry the lesson back toward the hearth's warmth. Softness can be comfort and caution at once. The trick is not to fear it and not to ignore it, but to meet it with steady hands, one quiet sweep at a time. The lanes look clearer again after the sweeping. Not pristine. Skara Brae does not waste energy pretending the world is tidy, but readable, passable, familiar. Sand still lies along the wall bases like a quiet animal that refuses to leave entirely, yet it has been nudged back into polite boundaries for now. The wind keeps testing the dunes, the seabirds keep circling in slow loops, and the sea keeps breathing at its own steady pace, as if it has never heard of urgency and doesn't plan to start. You walk the village one more time with the calm attention you didn't have when you first arrived. Your shoulders dip automatically at doorways, as if your spine has accepted the village's favorite philosophy: be humble and you fit through more places. The pin at your shoulder stays secure, and you feel a faint amusement at how a tiny missing thing managed to train your entire nervous system. You remember how you searched the lane edges and listened for that small click. Now you notice clicks everywhere: shell against stone, cord against basket, peat shifting as it settles. Tiny sounds that make the village feel alive without being loud. Inside one house, the hearth sits low and steady. The roof above it is snug again, turf layered like thick blankets, smoke finding its narrow way out without being pushed back by wind. The earlier rattle is gone, replaced by that soft, restful hush that tells you the building is breathing correctly. A few tools rest where they belong on stone shelves, and the net you helped rescue is folded neatly, its knots sleeping in a compact bundle. It is strange how quickly you begin to trust a routine when it proves itself. Find the pin, secure the net, mend the roof, sweep the lane, warm the porridge. Nothing heroic, everything essential. Your mind, usually addicted to fireworks, starts to accept that steadiness is not boredom. It is safety wearing a quieter outfit. The locals move through their tasks with the same unhurried competence, and you sense the day easing toward transition. The sea's edge glints farther out now, the tide having turned and pulled back what it claimed earlier. The dunes have softened into evening light, their ridges catching pale gold and then fading toward gray. Seabirds call less frequently, spreading their loops wider, as if the sky has lowered its voice. You feel something in your chest that is not sadness exactly, but a gentle tightening that suggests you are nearing departure. The village doesn't announce goodbyes. It simply keeps going. and you learn to recognize the moment when you must step away before you start clinging to the place like a damp cloak you refuse to hang up. You begin to think about what you can carry from here. Not a trophy, not a stolen relic, not anything that would turn this quiet place into a stage for your personal drama. Something smaller, something respectful, a token that doesn't take from the village, but holds a piece of your memory steady, like the pin holds your wrap steady, so you can feel grounded later when your mind tries to sprint again. You walk toward the shoreline where stone meets sand and the sea keeps combing its own hair. A tide pool catches the last light and the surface trembles softly with the wind. You crouch and let your fingers hover over the water. Tiny shell fragments glint like trapped starlight in the sand. Smooth pebbles lie scattered among darker stones, each one shaped by years of wave patience into curves your hand wants to hold. You pick up one pebble and turn it slowly between your fingers. It is oval and palm-sized, cool and heavy enough to feel real. One side is matte, the other side polished by water into a gentle sheen. It fits your hand so naturally it feels like it has been waiting. The stone carries the scent of salt and wet earth, and when you bring it closer, you can almost taste the sea on it. You think of the village's stone furniture, beds, shelves, cupboards, how stone here is not a symbol, but a companion. This smallest version of that companionship feels firm, simple, enduring. You could carry it, and later, when you are far from peat smoke and seabird calls, you could place it in your palm and remember how the village taught you to slow down without scolding you. Still, you hesitate. Taking anything feels like a decision, and you have learned that Skara Brae respects decisions made quietly and carefully. You look around at the shoreline. The sea has countless stones. The village has countless days. This pebble is not rare in the world, only rare in your moment. You decide it can be a keepsake without being a theft, because it belongs to the sea more than it belongs to any one hearth. You hold it one more time, then tuck it into your wrap so it rests near your chest, warm from your body, no longer cold. To balance the gesture, you return to the village with a small offering of your own, a simple act rather than an object. You choose one lane corner where sand collects too easily, a place you noticed while sweeping, and you take the reed brush again. You clear the drift gently, pushing sand back to where the wind can keep it without burying a threshold. You set a flat stone at the base of the wall where it will interrupt the drift pattern the way you saw earlier in the passageway. It is a small correction, almost invisible, but it will make tomorrow's sweeping easier. That feels like the most honest kind of thanks you can give here. Reduce tomorrow's trouble by a fraction. Inside, you return a polishing pebble to its place on the stone shelf, careful not to disturb the neat arrangement. You loop a length of cord more tightly so it won't tangle. You nudge a basket away from the draft. These are small motions, but they carry the village's language: attention, steadiness, prevention. Your body feels calmer each time you complete one. The hearth breathes low heat as evening settles. Porridge steam rises faintly again, perhaps kept warm for later, perhaps simply simmering because warmth is always being managed here. Smoke threads upward and escapes, unbothered. The roof holds, the lanes stay passable. The sea keeps its hush and pull. The seabirds drift farther out, ringing their quiet bells at longer intervals. You feel something in your chest that is not sadness exactly, but a gentle tightening that suggests you are nearing departure. The village doesn't announce goodbyes. It simply keeps going, and you learn to recognize the moment when you must step away before you start clinging to the place like a damp cloak you refuse to hang up. You begin to think about what you can carry from here. Not a trophy, not a stolen relic, not anything that would turn this quiet place into a stage for your personal drama. Something smaller, something respectful, a token that doesn't take from the village, but holds a piece of your memory steady, like the pin holds your wrap steady, so you can feel grounded later when your mind tries to sprint again. You walk toward the shoreline where stone meets sand and the sea keeps combing its own hair. A tide pool catches the last light and the surface trembles softly with the wind. You crouch and let your fingers hover over the water. Tiny shell fragments glint like trapped starlight in the sand. Smooth pebbles lie scattered among darker stones, each one shaped by years of wave patience into curves your hand wants to hold. You pick up one pebble and turn it slowly between your fingers. It is oval and palm-sized, cool and heavy enough to feel real. One side is matte, the other side polished by water into a gentle sheen. It fits your hand so naturally it feels like it has been waiting. The stone carries the scent of salt and wet earth, and when you bring it closer, you can almost taste the sea on it. You think of the village's stone furniture, beds, shelves, cupboards, how stone here is not a symbol, but a companion. This smallest version of that companionship feels firm, simple, enduring. You could carry it, and later, when you are far from peat smoke and seabird calls, you could place it in your palm and remember how the village taught you to slow down without scolding you. Still, you hesitate. Taking anything feels like a decision, and you have learned that Skara Brae respects decisions made quietly and carefully. You look around at the shoreline. The sea has countless stones. The village has countless days. This pebble is not rare in the world, only rare in your moment. You decide it can be a keepsake without being a theft, because it belongs to the sea more than it belongs to any one hearth. You hold it one more time, then tuck it into your wrap so it rests near your chest, warm from your body, no longer cold. To balance the gesture, you return to the village with a small offering of your own, a simple act rather than an object. You choose one lane corner where sand collects too easily, a place you noticed while sweeping, and you take the reed brush again. You clear the drift gently, pushing sand back to where the wind can keep it without burying a threshold. You set a flat stone at the base of the wall where it will interrupt the drift pattern, the way you saw. You linger at the doorway a final time as evening settles into the village's stone bones. The hearth has quieted to a steady glow under ash, the kind that promises it will still be there in the morning. Your wrap stays pinned at your shoulder and the small, smooth pebble you chose rests warm against your chest, already learning your heartbeat. Outside, dunes soften into shadow. Wind combs them with stubborn care, laying thin sheets of sand that shimmer briefly and then blend into the dark. Seabirds circle farther out, their calls stretched and faint, like someone humming from another room. The sea continues its hush and pull, never asking for permission to exist. You settle into the night the way Skara Brae taught you, without demanding that it entertain you. Embers are banked, tools return to shelves. A basket is nudged away from a draft. A lane edge is brushed back just enough to keep a threshold honest. The village does not chase perfection, it chases livable, and your restless mind begins to accept that livable is enough. Sleep arrives in layers, first warmth at your shins, then the weight of hide and woven mat, then the slow loosening of thoughts. In that loosening, you remember the missing pin and how patience found it. You remember the tide climbing and how careful hands lifted what mattered. You remember the roof's brief rattle and the turf laid snug again. None of it asked for panic, all of it asked for attention. At some point, the smoke thins. The hearth's glow fades to a gentle red. The seabirds outside fall quiet, and Skara Brae holds you in stillness. Stone under softness, roof over breath, a small pocket of calm pressed against a vast sea. Morning does not burst in, it seeps. Pale light slides into the lane and paints dune ripples with a silver edge. The air feels rinsed, cleaner than it has any right to be. Seabirds return first, ringing their weather bells with a few sleepy calls, then widening into their usual loops over the water. The sea looks calmer, the surface smoothed into long lines that drift toward shore and fold themselves away. Embers are coaxed back, peat wakes into flame. Smoke rises in its narrow path as if the repaired roof is exhaling. A pot is set near the coals and begins to breathe out familiar steam. The village starts again, not with excitement, but with reliability, and you understand why this place feels so restful. It repeats what works. You step outside and walk the lanes once more. Overnight, sand has crept in, because sand is loyal to its job, but the stones you placed yesterday interrupt the drift, and the doorway you cleared remains open. Small prevention holds. Sweep marks show faintly beneath new grit, proof that care can outlast one night's weather. Near the shoreline, mist hangs above the water and lifts slowly. Tide pools catch the morning sky in dark mirrors. A seabird skims the surface and rises on a current, and you feel the village's balance in your bones. Earth and sea, wind and shelter, all held in quiet agreement. The locals move nearby with the same calm presence you've felt since you arrived, guiding you simply by continuing their lives. A net is carried out again, not in defiance of yesterday's tide, but in partnership with today's conditions. A brush clears a lane edge with a few unhurried strokes. Their work is ordinary, and the ordinariness is the point, life kept gentle by routine. You feel your leaving take shape the way the sea's boundary takes shape on the shore, gradually, then unmistakably. You do not want to turn it into drama, so you make your farewell the village's way, quiet, useful, respectful. You return the reed brush to its place, you check the cord you tightened and find it still orderly. You press the pin at your shoulder, confirming it is secure, because even warmth needs fastening. Then you place your hand on the cool stone edge of a doorway and let your warmth linger for a breath, as if the house can feel it. You walk out along the path that threads between dune and shore. The wind meets you, familiar now, less an adversary and more a persistent companion with no sense of personal boundaries. Seabirds circle overhead, and one calls as you pass the last low walls, an ordinary sound that still feels like a blessing. Behind you, the village remains tucked into the earth, small and stubborn, holding heat, managing smoke, brushing back sand one calm stroke at a time. As you move away, the hush does not vanish. It follows you like peat scent on your clothes, like salt on your lips, like the steady rhythm of the sea in your ears. You carry the lesson in a simple form. Stay low when the wind insists. Keep warmth close. Notice small problems early, and let repetition soothe you instead of boring you. The dunes rise slightly ahead. When you crest them, you look back once. Stone roofs sit like folded shoulders beneath pale morning light. Lanes lie quiet. Seabirds widen their loops, and the sea keeps its hush and pull, indifferent and eternal. You let your gaze soften, then you turn forward and walk on, unhurried, with one smooth stone near your heart and Skara Brae's quiet breathing still echoing in your chest. The path keeps sliding forward under your feet, and the world grows wider and quieter with each step. Behind you, Skara Brae becomes a low shape in the mist, not disappearing, but softening, as if the past is quietly lowering its voice. Seabirds still circle above the shore, smaller now, their calls drifting faintly through air that tastes of salt and morning. You feel the pebble resting against your chest, warmed by you, steady as a small promise. When your thoughts try to run ahead, you let your fingers find that smooth curve through the cloth, and you remember the sequence that held the village together. Embers banked, porridge stirred, lanes brushed, roof padded, tide respected. Nothing hurried, nothing wasted, just enough, done gently, again and again. The wind follows you for a while, then eases, like it is satisfied you learned to bow instead of brace. The sea continues its slow breathing beside you, a rhythm older than any worry you carried in. Even if you forget the details later, your body will remember this cadence, the way it remembers warmth returning to cold hands. Now your steps slow naturally, your shoulders unclench, your jaw softens. You let the light blur at the edges, and you allow your eyelids to grow heavy without fighting them. If a stray thought appears, you treat it like a seabird passing overhead, noticed, then released. No need to follow it across the sky. You are safe. You are warm enough. You have done enough for today. Let the dunes keep their soft watch. Let the village keep its quiet breathing. Let the sea keep its endless lullaby. And as you settle deeper into stillness, you can almost hear a final whisper in the air, gentle and kind, reminding you to rest right here, now. End of story. Sweet dreams.